What is up? Playoff basketball is back, and so is Triple Dub. Now we are back to episode 6 of Triple Dub, the podcast that fills the stat sheet with record setting info about the latest NBA news, trends, and predictions. This is our third in season podcast, and we are recording this on the night before this video is released in order to gain the best insight possible regarding the most recent playoff games to be up to date when this airs. Right now, the Portland Trailblazers and the Los Angeles Lakers are in a very contested battle for the game one in their series. Now we're going to go to our initial take. Rohan?
Yeah, thanks for that intro, Aki. So, as you all know, we start off each episode with an initial take from each one of us. In this episode, we're going to discuss some of the breaking news that the NBA has seen during the bubble and during the first day of playoffs. So, I'm going to start off with my initial take, which is about some players that have returned from just absences from the bubble. First of all, Dennis Schroeder, Mike Conley, Montrezl Harrell, and Lou Williams have all returned. I'm sure there have been some other players that have also returned, but these are the most noteworthy players. All of these players were pretty rusty when they first re-entered the bubble. I believe Montrezl Harrell actually had limited minutes in the game yesterday against the Mavericks. But you should expect all these players to have more impacts as the amount of games increases. And these players are obviously going to have huge impacts on their teams. So you should also expect the teams to be doing better overall. So yeah, that's about it for my initial take. Now let's move on to Andy's initial take.
So I'm going to be talking about the play-in tournament that occurred on Saturday, I believe. But before I do that, I'm just going to talk about kind of how the qualification for the play-in tournament occurred. So last Thursday, the Suns and the Grizzlies played their games at the same time, and they both actually won their games fairly easily because their opponents, the Mavericks and the Bucks, were both resting players. So it was pretty easy for them to win. And these games officially eliminated the Spurs, who needed at least one of those teams to lose in order to have a chance. And they lost later that day, but it didn't really matter because they were eliminated anyway. But the final game that day was between the Blazers and the Nets, both teams who were playing really well up to that point. And if the Blazers lost that game, they would be eliminated completely, whereas if they won, they would get the 8th seed and play the Grizzlies in the play-in tournament. So it was a really close game, actually, very high scoring. It was kind of a battle between Damian Lillard and Karis LeVert, but the Blazers managed to come out on top and grab the 8th seed. So the play-in tournament ended up being between the Blazers and the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies would have to win 2 games in order to advance, whereas the Blazers would only have to win 1. So in the game on Saturday, after the first quarter, the Blazers looked like they were really dominant as they had 12-point lead already, following just 1 quarter. But after that, the Grizzlies actually became more in control of the game, especially John Morant, and they managed to get themselves up 5 points by the end of the third quarter. But with just 1 quarter left, big performances in the fourth quarter from CJ McCollum and Carmelo Anthony led the Blazers to win in a very narrow 4-point win. So they are facing the Lakers right now in the first round. So it's definitely an exciting finish to a 4-team battle for the 8th seed.
Yeah, one more thing to mention is that these seeding games didn't really have an effect on the lottery odds because the regular season officially ended on March 10th or 11th whenever the season closed down. So it means that a team like the Phoenix Suns, even though they were contesting really strongly for that last position in the playoffs, and they were so close. They were 1 loss from for the Blazers or Grizzlies away from making the play-in tournament and possibly the playoffs as a whole. They still have the 10th highest lottery odds, which is much better than I guess around 12 or 13. Which is where they would have projected. Now they have a 3% chance at the number 1 pick. And even a team like Washington, even though they fell further behind other teams, they're still have the 9th best odds, not the 7th best odds. But another thing which happened was the awards, which we talked about last week in our predictions. Check that out. And the awards were given to the players and coach of the bubble. And it went as follows. Obviously, the coach of the bubble went to the coach who led the Phoenix Suns back to almost making the playoffs with an 8-0 record, Monty Williams. The MVP of the bubble was Damian Lillard for going 6-2. And the all bubble teams were a little bit different because normally they have 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a center, or 2 guards and 3 forwards. This time they solely went on the best 5 players, which I think is a pretty interesting thing, which they might need to move into for general all NBA teams moving forward, because basketball is becoming more positionless. If you have players like PJ Tucker running the 5, you have players like Giannis who can defend the 1 through 5, you have players like LeBron moving to the 1 officially, but not officially. Then you have like positionless basketball doesn't mean anything anymore, and sometimes the best players get screwed. So the all bubble first team had 4 guards and a forward. So Devin Booker, Luka Doncic, James Harden, Dame Lillard, and TJ Warren. All 4 guards were the 4 guards which we had on our all NBA first and second teams. So that was pretty much predicted. TJ Warren also performed extremely well. So we were happy to see him on the first team. On the second team, we had Giannis Antetokounmpo, Kawhi Leonard, Michael Porter Jr., Kristaps Porzingis, and Karis LeVert. Now, the only member of this team who wasn't mentioned by any of us was Karis LeVert, and he showed since that day when, since before then, and on that day and the games which ensued, that he was a player deserving of it. Unlike many players who rested the last few games because they knew their seeding, even though the Nets knew their seeding, Karis LeVert played extremely well and still managed to average north of 22, 23 points a game, and made it really competitive versus the almighty Blazers. So now we will move on to the next segment of our podcast. This is the trivia. It's our weekly trivia segment, and I am the host. I will ask Rohan and Andy 5 questions related to the NBA worth 10 points each. And after 3 more episodes, the winners will make the loser do a forfeit. Just to remind everyone of the scores, I have 120 points, Rohan has 40, and finally, Andy also has 40 points. So it's really close to see who will get that second place. Are you ready? All right, so we will move to question 1. And rightfully, because it's number 1, we will talk about number 1. What college was DeAndre Ayton, the former number 1 overall draft pick, from? A is Duke, B is North Carolina, C is Wake Forest, and D is Arizona. Rohan with the first answer.
I'm actually fairly confident in this. I put C, Wake Forest.
Unfortunately, that is incorrect. If I'm not wrong, Wake Forest is the college Tim Duncan went to. You can fact check me on that, but I don't know any recent notable NBA players to come out from there. Andy?
I think it's just because I heard some like analysis before the draft that like the Suns should take Ayton because he's from Arizona. So I put D, Arizona. Hopefully that's correct.
And that is correct. Andy has moved to a total of 50 points, putting him in the driver's seat for second place. As we move on to question 2, I like the number 1 a bit more than number 2, so we're going to still talk about the number 1. How many number 1 overall picks did the Cleveland Cavaliers have between 2010 and 2015? A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, and D is 5. Rohan with the first answer.
I know.
Wait, actually, hold on. Andy actually had the first answer.
I just kind of guessed because I had no clue. I just put 1 because I guess that makes sense.
Unfortunately, that is incorrect. And Rohan also had the same answer. In fact, the answer is 3. Although you might only recall 1, they were in 2011, it was Kyrie Irving. In 2013, it was Anthony Bennett. And 2014, it was Andrew Wiggins. And Andrew Wiggins got traded for Kevin Love on draft night because LeBron was returning. So that doesn't change the score at all. As we move on to number 3, we've been talking about a lot of numbers. Let's move on to some more numbers. What NBA player was the leader in points scored in the 1980s decade? Option A, Alex English of the Denver Nuggets. Option B, George Gervin of the San Antonio Spurs. Option C, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar of the Los Angeles Lakers. Or option D, Larry Bird of the Boston Celtics. And the first response comes from Andy.
Just because he's the top scorer of all time, I'm not sure if he was the top in the 80s, but Kareem is my guess.
Unfortunately, Kareem was a bit of an old man by then, and he was playing alongside stars like Magic Johnson and James Worthy, so he did not have the most points in that decade. Rohan also guessed the same, which means that, again, no points are scored for this question. This is one of my personal favorite stats because it represents one of the most underrated players in NBA history and one of the most potent offenses in NBA history. It is Alex English and the Denver Nuggets. I think he beat out several other players by a small margin of points. But Alex English, yes, you might have not heard of him before, but he's the leader in that decade. As we move on to question 4, how many different NBA teams has Dwight Howard played for in his NBA career thus far? A is 3, B is 5, C is 6, and D is 8. Rohan with the first answer.
I guessed B5.
5 is really close, but it is not correct. Andy.
Judging from you saying it's really close, hopefully my guess of 6 is correct.
And yes, that is correct, giving you a 20-point advantage over Rohan. The teams which Dwight Howard played for, I don't actually have it up, so I'm just going to think of it on the spot. Orlando Magic, Los Angeles Lakers, and Hornets, Wizards. I forgot the other teams.
Rockets?
But yes, Rockets. And then there was one more team. I think the Hawks. He played for the Hawks for a bit. But yeah, that's that. As we move on to the final question, in fact. So that is going to be really important to see whether Andy can expand his lead to 30 or Rohan can close the gap a bit. Michael Jordan is the all-time leader in points per game across a career. Who is second? A, LeBron James. B, Allen Iverson. C, Karl Malone. Or D, Wilt Chamberlain. And Andy with the first response.
I'm guessing Wilt Chamberlain. I'm not really sure.
Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that both of you had the same answer, and I'm going to finish this by saying both of you got it correct. But Andy responded first. It's actually really marginal. Jordan, I think, averaged 30.12 points per game in his career. Wilt was 30.07 or 30.08, which is it's insanely close. I don't think anybody else tops 30. So Andy, really taking advantage of this episode, getting 3 questions right, and creating some separation between him and Rohan. Rohan will need to do a bit of comeback work, but that's okay because Andy still has 2 more episodes where he has to be the host. So we'll see how that goes as we move on to the main segment now.
All right, yeah, I'm definitely happy to take a bit of a lead there. I was struggling a bit before this episode. But now we have the main segment, and first is Aki with a fantasy update.
Right, so as we were talking about last week, I think Andy was talking about it, we were in a 3-way race for the top, and he gave reasons why he thought that Rohan had the best chance at winning, why he thought that I would be second, and why he, as a pessimist, would think that he was in third. Obviously, at that point, we had already sort of known that Kez would be a bit out of it because a lot of his players got injured or were sitting out, such as Joel Embiid, and Jamal Murray was out for some time. So here are the final scores. And you're going to be a bit in surprise of this. In 4th place, we have Kez. In 3rd place, we have Andy with 1,555 points. Kez was over 300 points behind. In 2nd place, with 17 more points, it was me. I had 1,572. And the number 1 fantasy person for this bubble, the winner of the official triple dub fantasy for the bubble seeding games, winning by a margin of a single point. Rohan with 1573. So Andy predicted exactly what would happen. Honestly, that's not what I was thinking. I thought I'd be in third because I was near their numbers. But I was sort of helped with some stellar performances in the end from Devin Booker and Jonas Valanciunas, which put me above Andy.
Yeah, I'm just like smart like that, you know? I may not be able to win. I just know who will win.
I mean, I guess we'll see in your bracket, which is going to be coming up. Speaking of the bracket, I think you have some updates.
And also congratulations, Rohan. But I just want to clarify. The only reason he won by 1 point is he was actually going to win by like a bit more. He just decided to sub in someone that would make him win by exactly 1 point at like the last minute. So yeah, just a troll. But anyway, so that wraps it up for fantasy, and we are completely done with that basically for at least a few episodes until we maybe do fantasy again next year. But we'll see. The next segment is instead of doing power rankings, which we did the last few weeks, because it's the playoffs now, I feel like power rankings don't really make as much sense. We're just going to talk about the first round matchups that are taking place right now. So I'm going to talk about them in order of when their first game was played. So the first one was between the Utah Jazz and the Denver Nuggets, their game yesterday. We saw a career-high 57-point performance from Spider Mitchell, but the Jazz still lost by 10, as the Nuggets shot an impressive 53.7% from three. Jamal Murray was definitely the star, especially in the fourth quarter and overtime. Yeah, so what do you guys see happening for the rest of the series?
All right, yeah, so I am actually a huge fan of many of the players in this series. Like, since I knew the Warriors were doing bad this season, and I wanted to at least like be a sort of secondary supporter of a team which was doing well, so I at least had something to look forward to instead of G League rosters playing good teams. I was a huge fan of the Utah Jazz basketball team this entire season, and I was really disheartened by the way the franchise and the players were treated and the repercussions since March. I personally didn't like how the reporting went down in March with the whole Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell thing regarding the start of the whole thing which is going on right now, the whole pandemic. But honestly, I just want to like preface this by saying that don't blame Rudy. He was the first case which the NBA found. That doesn't mean he was the first case in the NBA. If you looked at it closely, Christian Wood, a player which he played against for at least 25 to 30 minutes in a matchup, I think the previous Sunday, also tested positive. So there is no clue whether it was Christian who gave it to Rudy, Rudy who gave it to Christian, whether it was somebody else entirely, what it could have been even a staff member. But yeah, now talking about the actual series. I had Denver beating the Utah Jazz because of the loss of Bogdanovich in 7. I have this series going extremely far, even though the Denver Nuggets have won a lot of the matchups. All of them have been extremely close, and 2 of them have went to overtime.
So yeah, for me,
You can go ahead.
All right, thanks. Yeah, for me personally, I think that the Nuggets are going to actually win this series. I think the Jazz used to be the better team, but in the bubble, they definitely didn't look the same way that they did during the regular season, and especially the Nuggets, who performed very well in the bubble, exceeding all expectations. Even though they're a third seed team, people thought they would do pretty badly, and even without one of their star players, Jamal Murray, the Nuggets were still able to do super well. And now that he's returned, and he actually had a very good game upon his arrival, I think the Nuggets are going to definitely be able to win this series, potentially even a 4-0 sweep.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, just like the brackets that we made for the predictions for these games. We made them before any of the games took place, so that's why some of the things may not make sense. Especially we'll get to one in particular later, but yeah. So I believe in my original bracket. Let me just check real quick. Yeah, I had the Nuggets winning in five. I think after this first game, that prediction still pretty much holds, as the Denver Nuggets did win the first game. But I think the Jazz are just really going to need like some of their other players besides Donovan Mitchell to step it up but if they actually want to win, because they really can't rely on just one player scoring 50 points a game to have a chance. And even with him scoring 50 points, they still lost. Um, I think just like there's like some huge liabilities, especially in the front court, besides Rudy Gobert, that is, and they're really kind of feeling the loss of Bojan Bogdanovic right now. So that's definitely been affecting them pretty badly. So I think that the Nuggets will still win this series, even though Mike Conley is returning. I don't think he'll make that big of an impact. So I think the Nuggets will win pretty easily, I think. All right. So the next game that day was between the seventh seed Nets and the second seed Raptors. So the Nets were actually okay on offense, but Karis LeVert wasn't really playing. He was playing okay, I guess, but not really as good as he was during the seeding games. So yeah, but on the other hand, the Raptors looked pretty good, especially Fred VanVleet and Serge Ibaka, who played really well that game, better than they usually do, and they won pretty easily. But one problem that they did have during that game was Pascal Siakam and Kyle Lowry shooting pretty inefficiently. I think they shot 4 for 13 and 3 for 14, respectively. So do you guys think that the Nets will have a chance to take a few games off the Raptors?
I mean, after the first game, I don't really see much hope, especially because of the matchups and how poorly the two star players played. But I did have the predicted series going through 5, so I guess that's my take. But I honestly think that it's probably going to end up being a sweep. The Raptors have so many pieces, especially defensively, which can match up to Karis LeVert. And I don't think other players like Kuruks, Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot, and the rest of the squad will carry them.
All right, yeah, I originally predicted a sweep for this one, and my stance still holds, I guess. Rohan, what did you predict for the series originally?
Yeah, I really don't have much to add here. I was really debating between 4 and 5, but I eventually just settled upon 4 since they're the Brooklyn Nets facing the Toronto Raptors. Just saying it just makes me think of 4-0.
All right, so let's move on to the next game, which was between the 76ers and the Celtics. So the Sixers looked like they were kind of dominating the whole game, and they looked like they had a pretty decent lead after 3 quarters. But as the Sixers do, they managed to choke in the fourth quarter. That's just typical Sixers stuff. Joel Embiid played pretty well, I guess, but Tobias Harris was pretty bad, pretty inefficient, and Al Horford was bad. And I feel like they're really suffering without having Ben Simmons. Their backcourt is really just not particularly good, especially in comparison to the Celtics backcourt. The Celtics had a very good game, though, especially Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker and Jaylen Brown had pretty decent games as well. But one major thing that happened during this game was towards the end of the game in the fourth quarter. Gordon Hayward unfortunately sprained his ankle, and I believe he's going to be out for 4 weeks. So how do you guys think this injury will potentially affect the Celtics going forward?
I mean, for the first round, I don't think it's going to be too significant. Gordon Hayward wasn't having a particularly great game up until that point. And I think they have at least decent backups at that position. If you're going to be talking about players such as like Semi Oshale, Robert Williams, Grant Williams. Like they're decent enough to at least fit in a defensive role and passing to the three scores. Um, I really saw that Ben Simmons effect come into play when both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum erupted for, I think, close to 30 points, and one was over 30 points, and Kemba had 20 himself. So it just comes to show like what having a great defensive presence like Ben Simmons on the perimeter and to an extent the interior is. I had the Boston Celtics winning in 6.
Personally, I agree. I really don't think the loss of Gordon Hayward is going to have too much of an impact, especially since the Celtics have already had some experience playing without him, even in previous years as well, and part of this season. And I think the Celtics still perform very, very well. Even then, I think Gordon Hayward's more of an offensive weapon than defensive, a defensive player. And the Celtics have a really good offense. They have Kemba Walker, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. They even have some pretty good bench players as well. I think they have Enes Kanter, who's pretty decent off the bench, and they have Brad Wanamaker, the legend. He's pretty good too. So I think that the Celtics can really make up for this, and I think they're going to be fine.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with both of you. I actually had the Celtics winning in 5 just because of that Ben Simmons injury. Basically, I think it's just so detrimental to the Sixers. But let's move on to the last game of yesterday's 4 games, which was between the Mavericks and the Clippers. So Luka had a pretty much characteristically good game with like 40 plus points, but his 11 turnovers was a bit of a concern. And obviously there was the whole Kristaps Porzingis fiasco, I guess, yesterday where he got ejected, even though he really shouldn't have. And then on the other hand, the Clippers, for the Clippers, Kawhi had a really good game, I believe, and Paul George also had a good game. But so the Celtics ended up winning by 8. We also saw the return of Montrezl Harrell yesterday, which Rohan already talked about, but he only played 15 minutes. But I assume he's going to get more minutes soon in Game 2. So how do you guys think that the rest of the games are going to pan out?
Yeah, I have this one going 6. Even though the Clippers are my title favorites, I think good offense and good defense make for close series in the playoffs. I think that even though Luka had 11 turnovers and Kristaps got ejected, this game came down to the wire, and the Mavericks were leading for a decent bit. Now, the thing is, if the games are close, I'm going to give it to the Clippers every time because the Mavericks are historically one of the best offenses, yes, but one of the worst clutch performing teams of all time. And yes, that's because they are young, but I mean, there's not much to say about that. They're just experience, and defense just beats lucky offense and 3-point shooting in the closing minutes of a playoff series. I mean, I think that the Clippers are going to be perfectly fine, even though players such as Reggie Jackson scored 0 points in 16 minutes, even though Reggie Jackson is a starting caliber point guard. Montrezl Harrell played 14 minutes, scored 6 points. Like, Landry Shamet had no points. Like, the Clippers have weapons which they can utilize if players aren't playing well. The Mavericks require insane performances from Luka, KP, Tim Hardaway, Seth Curry, and they don't have much else. So I think this is going to be a Clippers win.
Yeah, I totally agree here. I actually had the Clippers in 5 as well, just because I think that the Mavericks offense may be able to get a big enough lead that they won't be able to blow it. And yeah, I do agree. The Kristaps Porzingis ejection was definitely not deserving. I actually saw a pretty funny meme on Instagram where there's Adam Silver who's like on the phone, and then the caption was, "Oh, look, eject the Mavericks have a lead. Eject the tall Latvian guy." It was, but anyways, I think that the Mavericks are definitely very explosive, and they have the potential to have these really good breakout performances. But at the same time, that poses a risk of like having these pretty bad performances. Because like Aki said, if the Mavericks don't get a good performance or like a huge performance from Luka or KP or these other offensive weapons, I think they're definitely going to suffer. And the Clippers are the more consistent team, offensively and defensively, and more clutch. So I think they're going to have a big edge.
I pretty much have nothing more to add. I also had the not the Mavericks, the Clippers winning in 5 games. But let's go to now today's games, starting with the matchup between the Magic and the Bucks, which was a huge upset with the Magic, the 8th seed Magic, winning by 12. I believe I saw an article. It's like the 3rd biggest playoffs upset in like 10 years or something like that. I'm not really sure. But Vucevic was just amazing. He put up 35 points and got 14 boards. Even players like Terrence Ross and Gary Clark had really good games. On the other hand, the Bucks, I guess with the exception of Giannis, looked nothing like they should, and nothing like they did during the regular season. Chris Middleton shot horribly, and even though he's like on a like 50, 40, 90 splits for this whole season. And Brook Lopez just wasn't the amazing rim protector that he's supposed to be, as he got absolutely dominated by Nikola Vucevic. So this obviously came as a shock to all of us, as we all had the Bucks winning. So are you guys starting to have some second thoughts about the Bucks advancing?
Well, for me personally, no, but I just think it's really, really just very depressing if you're a Bucks player that he lose to the 8th seed Orlando Magic, one of the worst offenses in the league, even though they're the 8th seed, and they put up 122 points against the Bucks, who are the first best defensive team in the league or something like that. But how do you do that? Something seriously must have gone wrong. And the Orlando Magic's second best scorer, Evan Fournier, averages 19 points a game. I think he was scoreless through the 3rd quarter. So the Bucks clearly screwed something up. I think that I totally agree with Andy. A lot of their players just weren't feeling right, especially Chris Middleton. He may have been sad about not hitting the 50% mark. Who knows? But I think the Bucks definitely need to step it up. I think the Magic had a very good game, but I think the Bucks will somehow recover from this. They also have a very good coach. I think they'll be able to do better moving forward. But I am very surprised, and I think that the series is a lot closer than a lot of us thought.
I can't agree with that. I have the Bucks in 5. I used to have the Bucks in 4, but I still have the Bucks in 5. If you I don't know, a year ago seems a really long time ago now, but if you go to, I guess, a year and a few months, to the first round of last year, the first game, the Magic actually won that too. And you know what team they beat? They beat the eventual NBA champion Toronto Raptors off a DJ Augustine 3 in the final, I guess, 5 seconds. And people are like, oh my God, the Raptors aren't it. Kawhi won't win. It's Giannis Easy's going to the finals. The Magic are such a big threat. What happened the next 4 games? The next 4 games, the Raptors stomped the Magic, and the Magic stood no chance. Let's take another example from last year. The Boston Celtics completely crushed the Milwaukee Bucks the first game of the second round, and this was their 5th straight win because they had swept the Pacers in the first round. People were like, okay, Boston has a chance. They could beat the Bucks. They could go to the finals. Kyrie might stay, and Kyrie might become the legendary Kyrie we all think he can be. But what happened next? Giannis and the Bucks stomped them out 4 games later. So I don't think this holds much significance. I think Bucks are still going to win in 5. I mean, like there are several players who weren't playing that well for the Bucks. Dante DiVincenzo had a terrible outing. So did Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, Eric Bledsoe through the first 3 quarters, and literally every single role player who could easily go off for them. Also, I'd also want to highlight, I guess, Terrence Ross. It's not Rick Ross, but it's Terrence Ross. So he did insanely well in the clutch in the 4th quarter. He was, I think, at like 8 or 9 points through 3 quarters, but the Bucks brought it to, I think, within 3 points, but then Terrence Ross kept hitting clutch shot after clutch shot in the beginning of the 4th quarter to put them away, and that's what ultimately did it. One last thing I'd like to mention is the free throw shooting from the Bucks. It's absolutely atrocious. Like, Chris Middleton, a 91% free throw shooter, goes 4 for 6. Giannis goes 4 for 9. It's not good.
Yeah, I really don't see any way that the Magic win the series. They had one good game. Okay, it's just like they can have their moment of happiness for a bit until they get stomped by the Bucks. But maybe just this one game is just a slight indication that maybe the Bucks shouldn't be the favorites to win the to make the finals. But I don't know. We'll talk about that. I'll talk about that later. Um, anyway, let's move into uh, the last three games, the third to last game, the Heat versus the Pacers. So TJ Warren was definitely better today than he was in the last game versus the Heat, where he was completely destroyed by Jimmy Butler. But apart from him and Malcolm Brogdon, there were really no one that played very well for the Pacers at all, and definitely not enough to beat this strong Heat team, especially with Victor Oladipo getting an eye injury early on in the first quarter. Hopefully he's okay and he comes back soon. But meanwhile, we had some pretty good offensive performances from Jimmy Butler and Goran Dragic, and even Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero were quite good offensively as well. The Heat looked very good today, and I think they'll probably carry that momentum into the next few games.
Yeah, personally, I agree that the Heat are gonna win, but I think I was also really excited for the series, maybe for a little bit of a more interesting reason, because Jimmy Butler and T.J. Warren, that beef was always pretty fun. I think like there was like that famous video where Jimmy Butler is like, "Oh, don't put this guy on me, like he's like effing trash" or something like that. Like that was actually Jimmy Butler to T.J. Warren, and that was like that's why I was pretty excited for the series. But the teams are also really good, and I think that TJ Warren, especially coming off a really hot streak in the bubble, he's been starting to die down a little bit. He didn't shoot as well as he normally did. I believe, looking at the box score, um, he had 22 points, but he actually shot pretty efficiently. But I think that the Heat defense were able to contain the Pacers. I believe they only put up around 100 points. The Heat were looking really well, and I think the Pacers have definitely lost their momentum a little bit, especially after losing a player like Victor Oladipo as well. But I think the Heat will be able to keep it, and I think the Heat will be able to keep the Heat going forward.
Man, we with the jokes today, huh? I guess. I mean, I don't have much to add. I really like the Heat team. I think they are one of the top teams in the East. They have probably the second best matchup versus the Bucks, actually. Even though it's sort of weird. I have the Celtics going far and ending up probably facing the Bucks in the conference finals, but I don't think they're as good of a matchup versus the Bucks as the Heat are, because the Heat have really good defense. But that besides, I think the Heat will beat the Pacers in 5. I mean, I don't think that the Pacers stand a chance.
Yeah, I originally had the Heat beating the Pacers in 6, but I'm starting to maybe reconsider that. Maybe it should be 5, but we'll see. Anyway, let's move on to the second to last game now, which was between the Rockets and the Thunder. So I think many people, whether they predicted the Rockets to win or the Thunder to win, they expected this to be a really close game, but that it was not. So James Harden had a typical 37-point game, as he just does pretty randomly, pretty often, I guess. And Eric Gordon and Jeff Green actually had some pretty good surprise performances as well, putting up 20 points each. And the Rockets just as a whole shot pretty effectively, almost 50% from the field and almost, I think, like 38 or something from 3-point range. But on the other hand, the Thunder shot pretty terribly, with the exception of, well, not all of them, but Gallinari had a pretty good game, and Chris Paul and Steven Adams shot okay. But Dennis Schroeder and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander were horribly inefficient. They both shot 25% exactly each. So that's pretty terrible. So do you guys think the Thunder will be able to bounce back from that, or is it over?
Personally, I actually had the Thunder in 6. I think this is actually one of the few series where it's really like split up evenly, around 50-50 in my opinion. There's like a lot of opinions going both ways. But as I said before, I had the Thunder mainly because Russell Westbrook is out with his like knee injury or something like that, and I think that's definitely gonna have a toll on the Rockets. But for the Thunder, at least I think that today was a bit of an off game. A lot of their players didn't really play as well as they normally would. I think even though Chris Paul, statistically, he had a good game, if you actually looked at the way he played, it was definitely concerning. He actually had a good amount of turnovers too. And some of the, better, more efficient scores in the Thunder, SGA and um, Dennis Schroeder, they're actually pretty efficient scorers. They're like 50%. They shoot 50% from the field or something like that. I think Gallo only shoots 40%. So the fact that the Thunder were not shooting that well, I think that was a little bit of an off game. And then the Rockets players who were historically not as efficient, they just put up more shots, I guess, like James Harden. They were shooting very, very well. I think up until the end of the third quarter, about the Rockets were super efficient. I think the fourth quarter just wasn't as good. So like if you look at the stat sheet, I think the Rockets shooting percentages were actually should be a little bit higher than what they are. But like if you look at the game, the Rockets shot a lot better than what you would think. So I think that the Thunder are going to be able to recuperate and come back. But I think that the Rockets will definitely stand a good chance. But I still have Thunder in 6.
My thought process is very similar to Rohan's in that I think that the Thunder will bounce back, and several players did not play well. I don't think anybody on the Thunder liked their performance except for Gallo. I think they will come back much stronger. They will have a dominant Game 2 performance, and I think that Chris Paul still has something in him.
Yeah, I was the only one that actually had the Rockets winning the series. I had them winning in 6. I knew this was going to be a really close series either way, the Rockets or the Thunder winning. But yeah, I think I could go either way. I really don't have much explanation for why I think the Rockets will win. I think if Westbrook comes back, which I doubt he will, but I think there's a slight chance, then the Rockets will have an easier chance of winning. But we'll see if that happens. Anyway, the last game, which actually ended about 10 seconds ago, as we're speaking right now, the Blazers just beat the Lakers. This is like breaking news. They beat them. Oh, it's not. I don't think it's technically over yet, but they're winning by 7 with 16 points left. 16 points, 16 seconds left. So it looks like the Blazers are gonna win. Do you guys think that the Blazers will be able to actually win the whole series, though?
I think that the Lakers are definitely the better team. The Blazers are just the more, I guess, hot, on a good roll, I guess. But I think the Lakers are definitely the more consistent team, as they've proven this season, taking the first seed in the West. I think that the Blazers hype is definitely going to die down, especially after I feel like the Lakers are going to have a good comeback. I think they're definitely going to smash the Blazers and at some point just absolutely destroy them in a couple of games. But this game was definitely an off game for both teams. I think the Blazers and Lakers are both one of the best offenses in the league. But I think they only had around 100 points. The Lakers had 93 points. Well, as of right, yeah, at 93 points with 16 seconds left. The Blazers have 100 with 16 seconds left as well. I think both teams shot around like 35% from the field. I think this game is not really reflective of the true skill of both sides. But I think the Lakers are gonna probably come back. I actually had the Lakers in 4, so my prediction's already wrong. But I just think the Lakers are better, so they're gonna win in 4 in my opinion.
Yeah, I have the Lakers in 6, but I am probably like one of the people who are like sounding the alarm right now. Like the Lakers didn't look good in the seeding games. LeBron had made statements that he doesn't think that he performs well if there aren't fans, and it showed during the seeding games. And looking at the box score for the Lakers, it didn't look good. Dame had 34 points, 6 threes, 5 assists, 5 rebounds. That's like a pretty good Dame performance. Melo didn't do that well. Nurkic didn't do that well. He did pretty decent. CJ had 21. Gary Trent had a bad game. Many pieces on the Blazers had bad games or were in foul trouble. Whereas on the Lakers, both AD and LeBron seemed to have good games on the outside, but if you look into the stats, actually they did not. AD had 28 points and 11 boards, but he shot 33% from the field and missed 5 free throws, which is absolutely crucial in playoff atmosphere. AD shouldn't be shooting 33% from the field. This is a center. This is the best big man in the league. There's no way he should be doing this. LeBron had a stat padding sort of game where he had 23 points, 17 rebounds, and 16 assists, which is absolutely insane. It reminds me of that Russell Westbrook game for Nipsey Hussle, that 2020 game. But it doesn't look good. If your guards aren't doing well, they can't guard KCP. Maybe instead of at least doing a little bit of offense, at least have some defense on Dame or CJ. And if you don't have defense, at least provide offense. At least don't go 0 for 2. He allowed Dame to score 34 points on him. And let me just read you the stat line. 1 point, 29 minutes, 0 for 9 from the field, 0 for 5 from 3, and 1 for 2 from the line, 1 rebound, 1 assist. KCP, that's not going to cut it.
Yeah, I had the Blazers, not the Blazers, I don't know why I keep doing that, but I had the Lakers winning in 5 games. And this is actually going out pretty much how I expected. What I expected is the Blazers to come in on a hot streak, shock the Lakers, and then the Lakers, wake up and then actually start playing basketball in a manner which the Lakers normally play. So I think that the Lakers are going to win the next 4 games. They're going to have, they have the wake-up call that Aki was talking about. But who knows? There's a chance that the Blazers could pull off something amazing and win and make it to the conference semifinals as an 8th seed. But I think that just about wraps it up for this segment of the main segment. But let's move on to the last one now, which is Team of the Week, I believe.
Yeah, thanks for the analysis of the playoff game so far, Andy. Actually, Alki too. But now let's move on to the Team of the Week. So this Team of the Week may be a little bit, just not as usual or not as fair technically, I would say, because a lot of teams actually rested their players and had their players play limited minutes. Other teams like the Blazers per se or the Suns had their players play more minutes. So I think that keep in mind that the Team of the Week may be a little bit skewed, and some playoff games have happened and some haven't already. So that's another factor. So now let's move on to the guard position. So the first guard position, I was really debating between 3 players. It was Dame, Luka, and Donovan Mitchell. But I think the first guard position is pretty clear. It should go to Damian Lillard, Dame Dollar, the rapper. It's Dame time. But yeah, he had really good performances. He actually had a 60-point performance exactly a week ago, I believe. He's been averaging insane amounts of points. I think he actually was averaging like 28.9 points before the NBA restart. But after the NBA restart happened, he was averaging 29.9 points. He was actually very, very close to 30 points. So he went up a whole point per game in just 8 games. That should show you how many points he scored. He scored like 50 in so many of them. He definitely deserves this spot. Any thoughts from you guys?
I mean, not only did he do that, but just in this past week, he's had to play in 3 crucial games. Like the first game, which was the last game of the seeding games, was really important that they win in order to make the seeding game. The seeding game was important in order to ensure that they made the playoffs, and then the playoff game is important because the playoff game. And he performed extremely well in all of them, so he definitely deserves credit for that. I think he's definitely out of the 3, he's the one that deserves it the most.
He won MVP. There's no reason why he shouldn't deserve it.
Alright, so this second guard position is a little bit more contested. As I said before, I was really debating between Luka and Donovan Mitchell. But I think this is a little bit unfair because Donovan Mitchell got rested in the last Jazz seeding game. But he had a very good performance actually yesterday, I believe. He dropped 57 points, I think, in 40 minutes. I mean, there aren't more than 48 minutes. But the Jazz actually ended up losing that game, but they did take it to overtime, and it was a really awesome game. But if you look at Luka, on the other hand, he consistently had 40-point performances, and he had his usual near triple double stats. But the Mavericks did lose. Like it was a clutch game. Obviously, they're gonna lose. But yeah, actually, in my team of the week, I had Luka just because he had two good performances. Although Donovan Mitchell had one good performance, I think actually better than both of Luka's performances. I think that his game where he got rested was not enough to make up for the other Luka performance. What about you guys? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes. I think it kind of depends on how you look at the team of the week situation. So if you're going by who played the most good games, it's Luca. But if you're going by who played the best game, you could say Donovan Mitchell. But just another option I want to throw in there is James Harden, because while Donovan Mitchell scored more points by like 20, James Harden still had a pretty good game, putting up 37 points. And unlike Donovan Mitchell, he actually won. So that's something that's going for him. He actually won a game, which is very important now that we're in the playoffs. So I think James Harden deserves at least a kind of honorable mention, I guess. But I think Luka's definitely a fair player to go in.
Yeah, I mean, Luka's a fine player to go with. I honestly, I'm a slightly, I guess you could call it, I don't even want to call it, like, I'm a biased Utah Jazz fan, which doesn't even make sense. But like, Luka had he didn't have a stellar performance. He only played like 13 minutes. He had a couple turnovers. He scored like 15 points versus the Suns, and he had a 42-point outburst versus the Clippers, but he had 11 turnovers, and it ultimately cost him the game. I would ultimately go with Donovan Mitchell because his singular 57-point performance was a bit better. I mean, if you like, Luka played only 13 minutes. Donovan Mitchell only played 11 minutes and scored 11 points. So I don't think that really matters that much. I'd put Donovan. Possibly even Jamal Murray.
All right, so that was definitely an interesting conversation for the second guard spot. Now let's move on to the first forward spot. I think there actually weren't too many good forwards as there were guards and centers, as you will see when I discuss the center position. But for my first forward, I had Kawhi Leonard of the LA Clippers. I don't think there's too much of a debate here. He was definitely the best forward in my opinion. He had the most consistent offensive performances. I believe he had in the game against the Mavericks, he had 12, 6, and 29, which is pretty good, and he actually had pretty efficient shooting, pretty solid defense as well. So that's about it for my first forward spot. What do you guys think?
Fine with that.
Yeah, I'm fine. I think we just might have a few discrepancies when we talk about the second forward. We'll see.
Yeah, so as Andy just said, the second forward spot is where it's going to get interesting since there weren't really too many standout performances aside from Kawhi. So just some honorable mentions are Tobias Harris, Jimmy Butler, and Actually, I'll just mention Giannis, but he had a pretty good game himself. But the fact that he lost to the Orlando Magic and let them score 120 points just completely nullifies any possible offensive performance. So I just want to throw out his name because he had a good game, but I'm definitely not gonna put him for the award for the team of the week. So my team of the week actually goes to Jason Tatum. That may be a bit surprising, just because the Celtics have really just gone under the radar just for like not having any breakout games. They've been playing pretty standard as to what people think they're gonna play like. But I think he had some very consistent games. He averaged around 30 points. I think most recently he put up 31, 1, and 32, I believe, against the 76ers, actually earlier today. I think he had some pretty solid performances, nothing really breakout worthy, but he just was better than the other players and the other forwards overall.
Yeah, those are the two forwards which I had. I think they played exceptionally well. Jason Tatum was fairly clutch, and Kawhi, he played well on both sides of the ball, and he scored when it mattered.
Yep, those are pretty much the two I would have as well. I don't really think there's any case for any of the others. Definitely not. I don't think Tobias Harris deserves the honorable mention after he lost today with a pretty bad game. Jimmy Butler, yeah, I guess he had a decent game against the Pacers today, but I think it's not really comparable to Jason Tatum's 30 plus points and 13 rebounds, I believe. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's definitely the correct decision.
All right, so the second forward spot was actually not as interesting as we thought it would be, but it's still a respectable spot. So now let's move on to the center. I think this is where it definitely gets the most interesting. So I'm just gonna list out a lot of centers that I thought that played well. I have 5 centers. So I have Yusuf Nurkic of the Blazers, Nikola Vucevic, Nikola Jokic, the Joker, the other Nikola, Joel Embiid, and actually no, I only had 4 centers. So just going player by player, I feel like Yusuf Nurkic was definitely one of the better centers that I thought. He consistently had 10 points and 20 rebounds, and he was definitely a very key player for the Blazers in their in their acquisition of that playoff spot. And in the most recent game too, he played very well. I think he's a very versatile center. He's a pretty good shooter as well as a good scorer in the paint. He's actually a pretty good defender as well. So I think he definitely had a really big impact on the Blazers. I think he's getting a little bit underappreciated because of Damian Lillard. But I guess Damian Lillard definitely deserves all the praise, but I think Yusuf Nurkic does too. Nikola Vucevic, he had some pretty average games before today's game where he absolutely steamrolled the Bucks. The Orlando Magic being the Bucks, that's not something you hear about every day. I think he definitely deserves the honorable mention. Joel Embiid, he has some pretty good games, but the Sixers have been losing a lot, so I'm not going to put him in the position. And yeah, and the Joker, I think he had a pretty good game. He's actually been having some pretty good games, but nothing like extraordinary. So now my spot is actually going to Yusuf Nurkic. I think it's definitely a respectable decision. I think Nikola Vucevic was another potential option, but I think Yusuf Nurkic has definitely been more clutch across more games. I think the Blazers have had around like 4 games or 3 games in the past week. And the Magic have only had like around 2 or 3, and Vucevic has only played in 2 of them. So that's why I had Yusuf Nurkic.
I personally did not have Yusuf Nurkic. I'm a big Yusuf Nurkic fan, and I definitely felt for him that day where he lost his grandmother due to this terrible disease. But I don't think his performances warrant what has had as the best center in the league thus far. He is not the number 1 option on his team. He's not even the number 2. Some people say he may not even be the number 3 option. They might put Melo over him. I personally don't, but I don't think that would merit him the best. But I am going to have Nikola Vucevic on the team because he put 35 on Brook Lopez's dome, and he led the Magic to a win versus the Bucks. And in the game on the 13th, he put up 23 and 6 against the Pelicans to assure their spot. Even though it wasn't a significant game, he still played extremely well. It comes to show how globalized the NBA game is when I say the best center thus far is Nikola, and you still don't know what center I'm talking about, right? It could be Jokic, it could be Vucevic, and technically until last year, it could have been Nikola Mirotic also. And there's another thing with like Bogdanovic, right? They're 2 completely unrelated players, Bogdan and Bojan, but they're both extremely good.
I agree with Aki on this one. I also had Nikola Vucevic. I think you can take in that like multiple games thing into account, but I think what really matters most is the playoff game, the actual game that matters, who performed the best. And I think it's clear that it's Nikola Vucevic. He shot, his splits were 62-62 and not applicable because he did not shoot any free throws, but just he was incredibly efficient from the 3-point line, especially for a center. Joel Embiid might want to take some lessons from him. Yeah, he was just super great, and also 14 rebounds. He was completely dominant, especially considering he was going up against one of the best rim protectors in the league in Brook Lopez, or at least he's supposed to be. I don't know if he was today. But yeah, I think Nikola Vucevic was just amazing today, so he deserves the spot.
All right, so that just about wraps it up for our main segment. Now let's move on to the hot takes. All right, so we're starting off with my hot take, and my hot take is going to be about the very recent Orlando Magic and Milwaukee Bucks game. So, as you guys can tell, this game was definitely an upset. No one would have expected the Orlando Magic to beat the Bucks, and it wasn't even close. It was by like 15, 10 points, something pretty significant. So, I think that the Orlando Magic will be able to get another game or two off of the Bucks. And this is probably a bit of a hot take. It's not too hot, but I think people think the Bucks are definitely a better team, so I would consider it a hot take for sure. But if you look at the stats for the Bucks this season, they're the first team in points per game, and the Orlando Magic are 24th in points per game. But the Magic scored 122 points on the Bucks, and I believe the Bucks are also the best team defensively in the league too. And the Orlando Magic are just not good offensively. They're like, let me check. They're 24th in points per game. So that really shows you that the Orlando Magic have figured out a strategy to beat the Bucks. I think a big part of that was Nikola Vucevic. He figured out a way to somehow get better matchups, even when he didn't get good matchups, and he was put on a 1v1 ISO or a post situation against players like Brook Lopez. I think he was still able to score and finish at the hoop. But even then, Nikola Vucevic was able to get so many switches, and I think in many situations he was put on shorter players like Pat Connaughton, George Hill, and he was able to take advantage of those situations and get easy baskets. I think this is something that the Bucks definitely need to work on, but I don't think they can somehow manage to fix it right away, especially since the Orlando Magic had many other players torch the Bucks defense like Terrence Ross. I mean DJ Augustine, even though he wasn't efficient, he got 11 assists, especially for a bench player like him. I think that the Bucks just played so badly that they can't just recover in one game. I think the Orlando Magic will be able to keep this going.
Yeah. So my hot take is about a particular player, and that player is Anthony Davis. So I think that throughout the rest of this first round series, Anthony Davis will have 3 or more 35 and 10 games. So this is because he already got like I think 6 or 7 offensive rebounds this game, which is going to be absolutely crucial if the Lakers want to play well. And he missed a lot of I guess what basketball fans call bunnies, or really short jump shots from a big man. I think those will fall eventually. And Anthony Davis, the type of guy, is like, when Gabriel is guarding me, really, I gotta put up 35. So I think that there will be multiple, I think 3 plus 35-10, 35-15, 40-15 sort of games from Anthony Davis in this series.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that take. I think that Anthony Davis, even if he may not be shooting well, he definitely knows that if he's not shooting well, he needs to go to the free throw line. And that's exactly what he did in this game. I believe at the very beginning, he was something like 1 for 8 or 1 for 9, but he had around 9 free throws and he was like 9 for 9. So he still, like statistically, he had around 20 minutes, but he actually had around 20 points too. So I think that 10 rebounds is definitely not an issue for Anthony Davis since he's one of the tallest players on the team. But I think point-wise too, he's definitely very smart. He has good basketball IQ, and he's a very good scorer. And he knows what he needs to do to get the points.
All right. My hot take, I'm going back to something we kind of talked about already with Rohan, and that is the Bucks. But it is not about the current matchup with the Magic, but it's about what I think will happen in future matchups. So we've seen what like this Bucks team, like which is supposed to be the best defensive team in the league, they struggled against Luca when they played against the Mavericks. They struggled against the Heat even when they didn't have Jimmy Butler, which was like even though they won that game, the fact that you're struggling to win a game against a team that's worse than you without their best player is pretty concerning. They struggled against James Harden and Russell Westbrook when they faced the Rockets, and they struggled especially against Nikola Vucevic and the Magic today. Um, they're just not like the number one defense that they're supposed to be. And same can be said about the offense. I mean, Chris Middleton is not looking like he did before the hiatus, shooting pretty inefficiently, and no one has really stepped up as kind of as good of number two options as some of the other good teams have, such as Kyle Lowry, I guess, for the Raptors, and Jason Tatum's probably first, but maybe Kemba or Jaylen Brown for the Celtics. Um, so I think that they're going to beat the Magic, but they're not making the NBA Finals, in my opinion. And I think that I could actually see them losing to even the Heat. I've already talked about how much I do like the Heat. They just have they've been better offensively and defensively recently. They have a really good culture. I think they'll just be able, and they have amazing bench depth in pretty much every position. So I think the Heat will definitely give the Bucks a run for their money. And even if they do beat the Heat, I think they would lose to whoever they faced in the conference finals, whether that would be the Raptors or the Celtics. The Raptors, because they have great defensive pieces that can shut down Giannis. Well, not shut down, but partially control Giannis, while they have a lot of good matchups in the backcourt, which I think they can win. And the Celtics, because they just have amazing depth with players like Jason Tatum, great defensive players like Jason Tatum and Marcus Smart, who can close down Giannis, and also great offensive players like Jason Tatum again, and Kemba Walker and Jaylen Brown, who can win offensive matchups. So I believe that whoever wins the conference semifinals between the Celtics and the Raptors will actually ultimately make the NBA Finals.
I don't know. I still have faith in the Bucks. I think this game is just a fluke. They rolled through the Celtics last year, and I think that they can do the same this year. They're just not a good matchup versus the Bucks. The Heat will be a struggle, but I think that Giannis will figure out Bam's defense. Bam is just a second-year player. I don't think that he's going to be much of an issue for Giannis and the Bucks. I think other players will step up. There are just too many pieces for them not to do well. And I think the Raptors are built in a very similar way to the Bucks. Just the Bucks have a little bit more offense and a little bit more defense. So I just think the Bucks will make it to the finals. And if they don't, I guess Giannis might rightly want out, especially if there's games like that today where he just dominates and the team just forgets to show up.
All right, so that wraps it up for what is now the sixth episode of Triple Dub. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you liked it, make sure to like. If you didn't, then let us know why in the comments so we can change that in the future. This is the Benchwarmers signing off. See ya.